My meme, Jeannine Beliveau, was born at home in Highgate Center, Vermont, during a raging blizzard and on the cusp of the Great Depression. Her early years were not easy. Her family battled untimely deaths and financial instability during some of the worst years America has ever seen. Despite her modest beginnings, Jeannine's work ethic and allegiance to family have made her prosper. Years of life have passed at an unprecedented time of economic, cultural, and technological growth in the United States. The changes in day-to-day life are nothing short of astounding. Here is her story.
Jeannine Beliveau was born on March 6, 1929, in Highgate Center, Vermont. A blizzard that day. I was born at 3 in the afternoon and at home, and the doctor had to come with his horse and buggy for 4 miles. And he came in the house and he told my father, "Give me a stiff drink." And I was baptized as Jeannine, Lucille, Marie, and Perpetua. That's Perpetua in French. Um, my parents are Wilfred LaRoche, my mother Alfreda Bilodeau, my paternal grandparents Edward LaRoche and Rosanna Garnier, and my maternal parents Melinda Fournier and Delphis Bilodeau. It was Rail, myself, Bernadette, Dennis, Ruth, Lucy, and my half-brother is Reginald. We had a half-sister named Lorraine who died at 4 months. And my step sisters and brothers, Claire, Helen, Tommy, Roger, and Donald, named Butch. So anyway, at 7 years old, my mother died. We had moved to Newport. She fell sick with leukemia for about a year, and then she wanted to die in near Highgate. She wanted to be buried in Highgate, so my father drove her to Burlington, and she died a week later. And so her wake was really tragic. It was held at her brother's farm house in St. Albans, Vermont, Uncle Uzzino. Well, at 7, you really don't realize that what dead meant. I always thought I'd see her again. I would be down the street, and I kept looking around and see if I could find her. Well, it was hard. My father brought us. He had to do something so he could work. He brought us back. He stopped at Burlington in an orphanage, went in, and they said that they couldn't help us. So then he drove us to Highgate, and he found uncles and aunts who were willing to take us in. Some were godparents, and I went to my Uncle Leonard, my father's brother, and so did Rail, and so did Harvey, because they couldn't have children, so they took us in. I lived there for a year, and then I went and lived with my grandparents, my paternal, for a year. They were my godparents. And then from there I went to the Furlans. That was Cecile's parents, Cecile. And she was my mother's sister, her mother, Mariano. And I lived there for a year. And then I went and stayed with friends of my parents and to help with their 2 small children. I was there for a year, and finally my father married a woman with 5 children 4 years later. So then he came and got all of us except Dennis and Ruth were brought up in Canada by a cousin of our mother's that didn't have children. And they were well brought up and educated and so forth. And then my Uncle Leonard, who had taken Harvey, Harvey got killed tragically when he was 6 years old. So that was a tragic moment for him. They came at night. We didn't have a phone. They came over to tell my father that Harvey had died. And my uncle felt so bad. My father was consoling my uncle at my uncle's house in Unity, New Hampshire. My brother was in the back of his pickup truck, and all of a sudden, and he was backing the garage was under the house. You know. My uncle, the truck stalled, so my brother got up to see what was going on, and then my uncle continued backing up, and the top of the pickup truck crushed his head with the garage. So that was, he killed instantly. At my uncle's house. Yeah. They had company, so the house was full. The beds were filled, and they had me there to help out. And so they had me sleep on the couch in the living room where the casket was. In the middle of the night, I wake up and I looked, and something was coming out of my brother's nose. Oh. I thought he was back to life. I woke up someone, and they said, no, it was too hot in the house. It was scary. 12 years old. Right. A year before that, our house burned down to the ground, and car and all. So from there, we went to an apartment, and then my father and his uncle built the house where we moved. And the night we moved into the house, that's when my uncle came and said that my brother had been killed. That was in Newport. My father and mother lived there. Yeah, it was nice. We liked it there. He worked in a clothing factory, and he was the fireman that took care of the furnace. Mm-hmm. And he cleaned the clothing factory. He had to, sweep at night and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So he did that most of his life. And so we were 7 that lived there. Claire was already married. Helen was living with friends, and Hami lived with Claire. So we were never all. And then Rail worked on a farm. We were never all together, just the younger ones. But we had a happy life. We all got along good. We still do with the stepbrothers and stepsisters. There were farms, but not around us. We were more in the town, a mile away from it. Oh, helping my mother between Bernadette, she was called Bunny. We did the housework. My mother would do all the cooking, the washing, and the ironing. And so that was our job. And we went to finish school. And so to help out my parents, I wanted to quit school and after the 8th grade, and I took a job in the shoe shop, stitching on shoes. And so I liked that, and it helped out the family. We get so much money a week to help. Well, I was 16 when I started to work. We always had plenty to eat, and so we didn't know we were poor. But we had a good life. That was very normal. There were a lot of families who, especially large families, they had to have support. Effort. Rail and my stepbrother Hami, both went at 17. They went in the service in the Navy, and so that's what affected our family. We couldn't wait to have them come back home, but they were at the end of when it was the end of the war that last year, so they didn't see the worst of it. We had a lot of rations like butter, gas. Mm-hmm. We get coupons, and we could only get like 1 pound of butter a week or whatever. Mm-hmm. A lot of different things that we couldn't have to save.
So after the war ended, life sort of came back as normal as could be. And then you met someone special in your life.
Right.
And that special person was?
Yeah, Jeannine Beliveau. He came from Saint Sophie, Canada. So he had to find work. There was no work in Canada. So at 18, he decided to move to the U.S. on a visa that they had to have special visa to work. So he started working as a lumberjack. He was in Berlin, New Hampshire, and then he ended up in Claremont. I was 17 and a half, he was 24. It didn't bother me at all. It didn't in those days. My two sisters married at 17. My uncle, twin. He, they met in a tavern, and my uncle said, I have two nieces there that I know of, and I'd like to introduce you. So he said, come on to my house. So he brought him his house. They lived down the hill from us. That's the Gagnes. That's Lorian and Rita's parents and all the big family. And so they had Clement, my cousin Lorian brought him up to our house. But Bunny was already on with her boyfriend. So I was left, so he took me. I was the leftovers. And so that started the whole thing. But what I liked, the best thing that I liked about him was he was so well dressed. He had a beautiful, for a guy that worked in the lumberjack, he had a beautiful suit and a long coat and then this beautiful brim hat, the rim, that style it was then. And he looked sharp, and that's what attracted me to him. We dated for 2 years, and then we married in October of '48. He kept, when I turned 18, he kept asking me, he was ready to get married, he wanted to get married, and I said, I'm too young. Then when I got to 19 and a half, he wasn't asking me anymore, so I asked him. So he was still a lumberjack at the time, so we got married in Newport in a range hall, and very, poor wedding, but we had a great time. We didn't know what poor was, we just enjoyed it. My uncle twin played the violin, and he said, Canuel, my cousin, he married my cousin, he was the accordion, he played the accordion, some had guitars, and so it was great. And so then I went and lived, we went in a one-room shack lumber camp for a year. That was in Warner, New Hampshire. And no water, no electricity, but we were on our honeymoon. It was great. We had another couple with us. Even Rail worked with us for a while. We moved to Newport. We found an apartment. We lived there only a few months. We lived with Bunny also, with her husband Russell. And then my husband he didn't want to work at lumberjack anymore. He couldn't find work. So one of his friends said, I heard there's work in Springfield, Mass. So they went down there, and my husband Clement found a job in the foundry. He worked there for most of his life between two different foundries. So we found work. I found work in stitching. It was Carter's undergarments at the time. I found work there. And then when I got pregnant with Denise, we moved. We bought a house on Bancroft Street in 1951 in Springfield. And we bought it in July. Denise was born in December. So then I stayed home for 13 years to raise my children. I had 4, Denise, Ronald, Monica, and Lynn. After the 13 years, I went to work in the Hamilton Standard in the suit room where they made spacesuits. And I worked on the spacesuit and on the backpack that they put on their backs. So that was hard, but I enjoyed it. And they the girls that were working with me, we got together and everybody voted me to be the queen of the suit room. So that was that was special. That was nice. I enjoyed working there. The highlight at that time, they had just gone to the moon, you know, and landed on the moon, and so that was very interesting then. There was one astronaut, I shook hands with him. Uh, uh, his name was Swigert, and so that was interesting. It's the idea we landed on the moon. We were the first ones, and that was a great thing. Yeah, everybody was excited, especially at Hamilton, you know, working on the spacesuits ourselves. Yeah, when Clement was 57 years old, he had a stroke where it left him paralyzed, and so that was a very tough time. We had moved to on Sherbrooke Street in Springfield. Lynn was 17 at the time, and he had the stroke while he had just laid down in bed, and so all of a sudden he just couldn't move, and so I knew something was wrong. I yelled at Lynn to call the ambulance, and we took him to the hospital, so that was very tough. The other three were married then at the time. Elwell Iron Works was a foundry, and then, the one in Westfield too, that's right. I forgot the name. And then he worked Stormstrock Forge, that's where he got his stroke when he was there. Then he drove trucks delivering meat from meat stores and at meat stores. Drove trucks to Boston, did trailer trucks, so he did all kinds of work. He'd get laid off, and a week later he had another job. He never was out of work. A very hard worker, always. Yeah, we got along fine. Brought up our kids, you know, they tell me today that they enjoyed their life being when they were being brought up. They all say they had a good life, so that makes me feel good. Besides, I enjoyed my in-laws, Clement's mother and father, and sister, Nodette, his brothers, really, and Sid lives in East Longmeadow. Wonderful sister, Georgette, sister-in-law. And my sister-in-law, Gabby, we always lived close. We always got along great.